Buckle up, because we're merging back into traffic on Radio Nemo's Nemo Nation.
Format that is so wonderful is we do those 30-minute blitzkriegs where we essentially have three guests, and it's actually about 27 minutes that actually takes place over with. And, and we're still getting used to it, by the way. I know Dave's still getting used to it, where you start to ask long-form questions and you look up and your producer and the guy across the table are looking at you going like, you have a minute left, Dave. You can't ask that question, or the next guest is going to get reduced down to 4 minutes, which will make the next one worse. But it is set up for what's happening today. Jeff Dickinson joins us again. He's the president and CEO of RGTX. He is also the chairman of the Freight Fraud Task Force, and we are thrilled to have him back on today to kind of get into more depth about what it actually is the Freight Fraud Task Force is, its origin story, but not just that. But there was a lot of discussion of culture in trucking and how much of fraud is also the responsibility of the way individual drivers purport themselves, handle themselves, and the business around both their cab and their pre-trip and their post-trip. All of that was actually introduced by Dave in the conversation, and there wasn't enough time to really dig into it then. So I thought we would pick up with Dave and Jeff getting a chance to really dig into those questions that Dave was itching to ask. Hey, Jeff, thanks for making time for us by coming back again. We are thrilled to have you. And for those of you who don't know, this is the Bodacious Cowboy who is joining us this morning. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Dave. Hey, thanks again for having me on the show. I thought we had a good conversation last week, and I appreciate you having me on again.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being with us. One of the things I want to point out here, and it seems like something you read over and you don't think about it, this is the first non-profit organization dedicated to preventing and stopping freight fraud. Kind of unpack that if you would, because I kind of almost thought that any organization like this would be non-profit. But there seems to be some kind of delineation there.
Yeah. So, over time, I have a lot of connections, and about 10, 11 months ago, this idea came up with one of my really good friends, Dale Prax, who is the owner of Freight Validate. And we were just talking, and, a long time ago, the government had this organization that they were thinking of called the Freight Fraud Task Force, but it never came to fruition. And so we started talking about it and said, you know what? Maybe we should take it in-house and start doing something like that. Now, Dale is a advisor. It's not part of the board, but we needed to do something. Fraud has been, growing for decades. It's not something that just happened. And what happened that caused it is that, a lot of people left their guard down, shippers, brokers, carriers, all alike. They stopped doing what they were supposed to do a very long time ago. And I'm going old school. And I'm talking about building relationships, those ironclad relationships, and understanding each other and how they operate. And I'm sure that, with your time in the industry, you kind of understand that as well. And it's just a huge missing part, Dave.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. One of the other things, too, and I'm going to throw another a name out here, the Transportation Risk Defense Alliance, that was born out of the Freight Fraud Task Force. How is that relationship? What is the relationship there?
Sure. So I want to do something that no one else has thought of, and I wanted to make it unprecedented, meaning that I wanted to have partners that were on the front lines, that kind of set the standards as far as whether it's on the law side or on the insurance side. So I started up a conversation, and again, a lot of good deals happen on a golf course, and one of them with USI Insurance Services, the fourth largest commercial broker insurance company out there at $2.8 billion. And I spoke to the vice president of logistics and transportation. We had a great conversation, and one thing led to another. And it just so happens that our lawyer, who started up the Freight Fraud Task Force, meaning making it legal as a nonprofit, he was also in the industry, and he started up the TLPSA, which is the Transportation Loss Prevention and Security Association. And his name is Thomas Martin, a well-recognized lawyer that was part of the ATA back in the 2000s. That the company or the organization used to be called the TLPSA, and they changed to the association around that time, and it's been growing. And they are, they defend carriers, brokers, you name it. That's the industry that they're in. So it's something that nobody else thought of to attack the freight fraud from an insurance point of view and on a legality point of view. And of course, with my background and experience working for shippers for over 37 years on the front lines and putting them all together to figure out, is there another way? And we think there's another way of fighting fraud than what's currently going on.
It's interesting, by the way, really quickly, and you point out about the idea of going old school. Jimmy Mack here, by the way. The one thing that people don't realize is that people who engage in fraud and criminality, whatever their issues are, they are incredibly adaptable. And I always use the example, if you think that the mob and those in the criminal element weren't ready for what would happen the moment Prohibition got overturned, you didn't know who they are. And they've learned that lesson a long time ago. They're always looking for the next best thing, which means they are keeping up with the technologies in a way that a lot of people aren't. And I was kind of wondering, with your organization, if you are teaching and training people not just to look at the fraud that is happening now, but what the possibilities are for new fraud. In the way that Billy Martin used to baseball manage, he would say, what is the most dastardly thing my opponent could do to me? And then figure out a way to counter it before they even tried it. Am I making sense there, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. And I have this saying, Dave, you have to outthink the thinkers. You almost have to think like a thief and how they can circumvent what you're currently doing, and try to put up those walls, those barriers, those obstacles that kind of make it hard for them. And I'm a true believer, being that I've worked on, the shipper side for many, many years as a logistics manager, both on a carrier side as well as for shippers. And I just think there's a lot of lost processes. I believe, and just common sense wise, that all fraud is initiated by a shipper. No matter which way you look at it globally, it starts at a shipper and what they do. And when they go out and they search for new service providers or carriers or freight forwarders or NVOCCs to move their freight, what are they doing? Or now, what aren't they doing to stop fraud from happening? And there's a lot of great tools out there. I don't have anything bad to say because there's a lot of passionate people out there who are very tech savvy. They have fantastic tools, but they're more reactive than proactive. And yes, they're proactive in one way, but they're not in another way because they're not down in the weeds as far as the tool. They can't write work instructions or process improvements, structured processes that shippers can use to stop freight fraud from happening before it happens. And that's taking additional steps that the tools cannot write. They cannot write that stuff because they're not there having the practical experience or understanding, especially on the broker side. Only about 18% of all brokers have even walked into a warehouse or distribution or had that logistics experience background. So they're missing out on a lot of things that they should be aware of. And that comes with education and training.
I want to ask you a question, and this may sound like Dave's dumb question of the year.
Dave's dumb question of the year.
All right. We have theft and we have fraud. Okay, I've got a trailer full of cigarettes, and I tell somebody that I got a trailer full of cigarettes. I go in to take a shower, and my trailer full of cigarettes is gone. That's theft. All right. What is fraud? In other words, we think we know what words mean until somebody asks us. And I don't know what fraud means in terms of getting that trailer full of cigarettes. Is fraud, is the goal of fraud theft? In other words, do I enter into fraud to commit a theft?
Sure. No, that's a great question.
And how far back do we go? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
In all intents and purposes, fraud is a deceptive practice that gets you kind of hooked in there. That starts the whole process of fraud happening. They're going to be deceptive. They're not going to be truthful to you. They're going to hijack your identity. They're going to steal your data. You know, they're going to go through your firewalls. They're going to figure out all those things, even you know, from stealing MC numbers and all different kinds of things. It always starts with a deceptive practice. That's fraud. The theft comes pretty much after that. Or here's another thing too. Theft can also be an inside job. It could be a driver that doesn't feel like he's getting paid enough, and here's a great opportunity, and he talks to somebody and says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to leave the keys on the the front left tire. Coming at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I've got stereo equipment in there, and I got a guy where you can just drop that off, and we'll get rid of it, and we'll split the difference." I mean, there's so many different types of fraud and theft.
I got it, by the way. I got it. This is really fun. Fraud, by the way, is the tools you use it to break into the house. Theft is what you walk out with.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask you a question, by the way. You talked about old practices, and tell me if I got this wrong, but from what I'm understanding, you're a big believer that going back to some older practices might help indemnify you against fraud. And one of the things you mentioned just kind of in passing was the idea of people just wearing uniforms. But can you talk about the idea where some of the older, more traditional practices might be the beginning of building a foundation to protect yourself against fraud?
Yes, and it's a perfect point. Back in the 80s, before deregulation, drivers really appreciated their job. They respected their job. They respected the company. They respected shippers. They wore uniforms. Their cabs were clean. They had baseball caps on. They had shirts on that had a logo in there. They didn't wear dirty clothes. They were kind, respectful. Nowadays, you don't really see that much. And here's the caveat behind that. Right now, you see these shippers out here. They're not letting the drivers use their facilities because they're messing them up. They're disrespectful. So they're setting themselves up because they don't really get to see the driver or see the truck per se. And back then, in that day, we appreciated all the drivers and the carriers. They came, the reps came in, they bought pizza, not to say that's the correct way of doing business and all of that, but it was nice and kind of them to do that. They respected you. The drivers came in, they talked to you. We talked about their families, their kids, starting to become friends. There's not too many friends out there in the industry now on the carrier side. When you look at brokers and carriers being friends, and brokers and carriers and shippers being friends, it's not there, Dave. It's not, and it's causing a lot of problems. It's a huge misstep. When I was working on that side and shipping very expensive material and merchandise, Fridays I had coffee for the drivers. Sometimes I brought pizza in, and I told them, hey, come on in 12 noon, in the morning to do your deliveries, pickups in the afternoons. And we sat down and we started talking about families. He says, "Hey, you want to take a look at my truck?" They were just very respectful and loved their job. Now it doesn't seem that way. I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer, but it's just reality. You can see it out there. You see pictures out there, truck stops, and these guys coming out in their underwear. And I mean, I'm not just saying that, they do, and their clothes are torn and they're unshaven and they don't, I mean, it's just terrible. And that's what we're missing today. That's just coming from old school, because I've seen it. If I was a new person right now coming in the industry, I wouldn't understand that because I wouldn't have known what it was like back then. Not to say that, the unions took care of their drivers. And right now, I'm not anti-union. I'm not pro-union. I'm just playing neutral here from what evolved from that situation. And it just seems like there's so much that's missing, that it could be so much better if they just took a little bit more steps and be kind to each other. I don't think I'm asking too much.
You are not.
Dave and I were just exchanging a note, by the way, during your conversation that says, I mean, the basic takeaway is the less people you know in your industry while you're in the industry, the more susceptible you are to fraud. It's that basic, right? I mean, the less human contact you have, the less people you deal with on a regular basis in real life, the more wide open you make yourself to fraudulent practices against you. Is that fair?
That's fair. And then also, especially when you're looking at dedicated to spot, and I called it, for a very long time, and I still call it that. I call the spot market the petri dish for fraud. When you see loads that are out there multiple times, I'm talking 10, 15 times from all different types of brokers out there, different rates on there. It's like, what's going on? Well, the shipper's going out to multiple brokers trying to get the best rate, and they're putting it on the board, and now they start scrambling. And I always say this about the shipper, but I never did it. But the cheapest is the most expensive way to conduct business in making decisions, critical decisions that will bite you in the later on. See, when I say $700 savings on a load, if you're not careful and you don't play your cards right, that $700 could be $7 million in a suit, in a claim, because you just didn't take the extra steps and you were looking at, savings, over diligence. Do it fast, just get it done, and we'll take our chances. And that's, you're riding a real thin line there, boy. We're walking one, definitely.
I want to ask you something that may be a really off base here, but it got me to thinking, and I was going back a few years when ADAS, the Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, came into place. You could buy this stuff off the shelf and pretty much put an ADAS system together in your truck or car. The ELDs, the electronic logging devices, they're pretty much off the shelf. I was stunned at how many manufacturers there are of these. What I'm getting at is this. Do we leave ourselves, does off the shelf in terms of electronic gear that tracks us and keeps, our numbers for us, is that off the shelf stuff, is that an easy way for folks to kind of get into your gear? In other words, is that dangerous, even though it's pretty much universal now?
Well, look, thieves are going to find, you talk about cybersecurity, that's all part of it, and being able to, infiltrate systems and steal data and information and what's on it, and where it's going. It's out there. It's tough. I mean, they are fighting that every single day. But the thing is that with the GPS you got to put up geofencing, especially on very expensive, high risk materials. Like when I was shipping like Tough Books for Panasonic, highly expensive truckloads. We never used to send them on the same route. We always changed the routes up. We never said anything up front when we were getting the procuring the load and giving it to one of our carriers to move, because thieves out there, they come, they watch, they study well in advance before any shipment goes, especially big shippers with high value shipments, and they kind of follow, and they want to see what's going on with specific lanes. And we used to change them. I mean, there's so many different things to do. And yeah, does that affect, on-time delivery appointments? Sure. When you're switching up lane configurations and how you're going to route them. But, there's just certain steps that you can do. But if a fraudster or thief want to do something, they're going to do it. And it all comes down to the shipper. Who are they going out to? Are they vetting them? Are they digging deep into the weeds to find out, or are they just saying, hey, XYZ carrier's coming in door 6, just load them up and let me know when you're done, with no work instructions for the dock supervisor, or the outbound specialist that's procuring or getting the carriers to come in. What are they doing? What's the process in doing all of that before they let a shipment go?
By the way,
just a ton of stuff that needs to be done.
I was going to say, guys, we're joined this morning by Jeff Dickinson. He is the president and CEO of RGTX Logistics. You can go to rgtxlogistics.com to find out more about him. One of the other things I'm really hearing here, and I think a lot of people remember this, you've actually pointed this out a couple of times. The thieves and the fraudsters are going to do their thing. They're going to get somebody. The real trick here is to make sure you're the one not getting gotten by making yourself unattractive to them. And that even the simple process of changing a route on a regular basis, anytime that you can remove the predictability from anybody who's targeting you, you become much less attractive for anybody targeting you. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay, so I want to talk right now really quickly before we actually have to wrap this up, for you to kind of talk about, for people who are behind the 8 ball and people who are behind the times, what is a really good way of ramping up your security systems and your approach to all of this in a hurry to kind of establish a foundation and then begin to get to more sophisticated sort of approaches?
Yeah, so, the way that I've done things as far as a preventable step, it has to start at the shipper and what they do. Management changes, processes are written. Do those people go in there and administer what's already been created, or do they tear it up because of their experience and rewrite the rules and regulations of how to do business with, the people they do business with? So that's where you start from, at least from my point of view, and what I would do if I was going in corporate right now. I would go in there and I would look at the policies and the work instructions and what they have. What kind of policies and work instructions do you have in place in regard to preventing fraud and theft happening? What's your IT people doing? What are the steps that you have in place that are going to minimize that? Are you talking with the assets, and if the assets have overflow, are they identifying that they're going to give that overflow to ABC company, or they're not going to say anything, and then ABC company comes into your dock to pick up for so and so? Red flag. You didn't know that they were going to come in. Nobody told you up front. Communication, collaboration. The best preventable thing is to have collaboration and relationships. Do you actually know how to build one? or you just calling up a carrier just to have a conversation with the dispatch because you're under pressure and you want to get that shipment picked up. There's just so many things that can be put into place to minimize the chances. And those are the biggest ones that come to the top of my head that they just failed to do because they're under pressure. They have to save money because the CEO, CFO, president tells that logistics manager you need to cut savings and put more money to the bottom line. And it all starts from there. The pressure's on. It's what you do under pressure that's going to stop a lot of this stuff out there. And that's what, the Freight Fraud Summit and my partners, that's what we're going to talk about, and the legalities behind making the wrongful decisions. And people always say, Dave, it'll never happen to me until a catastrophic event happens. And it's funny how the mind changes when those things happen, and then you start putting process. Be more preventative, not reactive to situations that are happening. Try to outthink the thinkers when it comes to fraud and how they would infiltrate your system. And do you have the proper protocols and things in place that can stop them in their tracks before that happens?
By the way, first of its kind, the Freight Fraud Task Force, Inc., you can find them, by the way, on LinkedIn. And, of course, Jeff Dickinson, who is so instrumental in that, the president and CEO of RGTX, joins us this morning. If we actually tried to give you his bio in logistics, it would be the entire segment, even the 27-minute long one. Jeff, thank you for making time again. We wanted to give you a real chance to dig into all that stuff, and I for one, am very glad we did. By the way,
too.
Enjoy the National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. We're thrilled to have you on the first Monday of it.
Yes, and I want to thank all the drivers out there who are moving America. We wouldn't be in the positions that we are in as an industry if it wasn't for you. So drive safe out there, and do things right. We appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.